They say, your life flashes before your eyes when you're about to die. For me, it wasn't my life that flashed before me, but his. Robert. My Robert. His face, captured in that oil painting we'd commissioned for our 25th anniversary, was the last thing I saw as the flames took my home. The heat was so intense I saw the edges of the canvas begin to curl and blacken. His smile, that steady, reliable smile that had anchored me for 37 years, distorting, then disappearing into the inferno. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. That's the image seared behind my eyelids, more vivid and more painful than the wall of fire itself. My name is Grace. And at 65 years old, I thought I had already faced every kind of heartbreak life could throw at me. I was wrong. It started with a smell. Isn't that how so many tragedies begin? Something small, something almost insignificant, that you dismiss until it's too late. I was in my kitchen, the heart of the home Robert and I had shared in Charlotte for over 40 years, fixing my afternoon coffee. It was a Wednesday, a perfectly ordinary Wednesday. The sun was streaming through the window over the sink, illuminating the tiny dust motes dancing in the air. I was just about to pour the hot water when I caught a sharp, acrid scent, like burning plastic mixed with something ancient and woody. It was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. Probably the old wiring in the hall lamp, I muttered to the empty room. You develop a habit of talking to yourself when the silence of a house becomes your primary companion. But a cold knot of dread tightened low in my stomach, a primal alarm bell my body heard long before my mind would acknowledge it. I abandoned my coffee and moved toward the living room, my worn slippers whispering against the linoleum. The house felt different. There was a new sound, a low, hungry crackle that was utterly foreign. And the air, it felt thick, heavy. My hand touched the living room doorknob, and I recoiled. It was warm. Not from the sun, but from a fierce, unnatural heat on the other side. I pushed the door open, and my world ended. A roaring, orange hell greeted me. Smoke, thick and black and greedy, billowed out, hitting me with a physical force that stole the breath from my lungs and the sense from my head. My eyes screamed, watering instantly, but the tears couldn't wash away the nightmare. The floral print curtains, the ones my granddaughter Lily had said were so pretty, were now torches, the fire racing along their length with a terrifying, living speed. It was already climbing the walls, those same walls that held the faint, penciled lines, marking David's growth from a toddler to a man. I stood there, paralyzed. My mind simply broke. It could not compute the reality of the destruction unfolding before me. This was my home. The place where David took his first steps, where Robert proposed to me on one knee by the Christmas tree, where I'd grieved my parents and held my first grandchild. It wasn't just a structure, it was the museum of my life, and it was being vandalized before my eyes. The smoke detector, why was it silent? The question pierced my stupor. The silence was a scream in itself, and then I remembered, the chirp. That low, battery-dying chirp that had been a minor annoyance for months. I'd meant to change it. I'd added it to a mental list 100 times. Change the smoke detector battery. A $5 task. A moment of my time. And that simple procrastination, that tiny oversight, was the price tag on my entire existence. A survival instinct older than thought itself finally kicked in. Get out. The command was so loud in my head it was almost a voice. I stumbled back into the kitchen, coughing, my lungs burning as I inhaled the poisonous air. The phone. I had to call for help. I fumbled for the old corded phone on the wall, my fingers thick and clumsy with panic. But the smoke was everywhere now, a disorienting fog that made it impossible to see, to think. Then came the sound of shattering glass. The living room window. The fire was breathing, growing, demanding more. There was no time. My purse. My eyes, stinging and blurred, scanned the kitchen table. There it was. My brown leather purse, worn soft with age. Inside was my wallet, my ID, a photo of David as a gap-toothed 7-year-old, and a secret I'd carried for 40 years. It was all I had left. I lunged for it, my fingers closing around the strap like it was the only solid thing in a world turning to liquid fire. I ran for the back door, my body moving with an adrenaline-fueled speed I didn't know I still possessed. As I fled, my eyes caught one last, devastating glimpse from the hallway. The portrait of Robert. The heat was blistering the paint, his kind eyes melting, his smile dissolving into nothingness. It was like watching him die all over again. I burst out into the shocking clarity of the backyard, gulping the clean, cool air in great, ragged sobs. The contrast was surreal. The sun was still shining. Birds were still singing in the old oak tree. It was all so violently, cruelly normal. My neighbors were already gathering in the street, their faces pale masks of horror. Dear Mrs. Jenkins, my 78-year-old neighbor, was the first to reach me. She didn't say a word. She just wrapped her thin, strong arms around me and held me as we stood there, two old women, helplessly watching the fire devour 42 years of my life. The fire department arrived with a scream of sirens that tore the afternoon in two. They were there in minutes, men in heavy coats looking like astronauts from another planet, moving with a grim, practiced efficiency. But I knew, I could see it in their postures, in the way they focused on containing the blaze, not saving my home. It was already a ghost, a lost cause. In just 1 hour, a lifetime was reduced to a blackened, smoking skeleton. I stood on the sidewalk, wrapped in a rough wool blanket someone had put around my shoulders, and I tried to catalog the loss. It was impossible. It wasn't just things. It was the physical manifestation of my history. The kitchen table, scarred from where David did his homework. The wall in the hallway, holding the timeline of my son's life. The bedroom I shared with Robert, where we whispered our dreams and where I held his hand as he left this world. All of it. Every scrap, every memory, every tangible proof of a life lived and loved. Just gone. Later, the fire chief approached me. His face was smeared with soot, his eyes red-rimmed and full of a pity I couldn't bear to accept. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," he said, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. "We did everything we could, but he didn't need to finish. I could see it for myself." The words hung in the air between us, as heavy and final as a headstone. Total loss. Everything I possessed, besides the clothes on my back and the contents of my purse, had vanished from the earth. The neighbors, the lucky ones who still had homes to return to, fluttered around me with offers of water and sympathy. Mrs. Jenkins insisted I stay with her that first night, and I was too hollowed out to argue. Her small apartment was warm and cluttered, filled with the vibrant chaos of visiting grandchildren. I felt like a ghost haunting her living room, a cold reminder of how fragile it all is. The American Red Cross came, a kind woman with a clipboard talking about emergency shelters. The thought of sleeping in a gymnasium on a cot, surrounded by strangers wrapped in their own tragedies, made me feel even more lost, more untethered. That's when the cold, hard truth crystallized in my shattered mind. I had to make the call, the one call I'd been dreading. I had to call David, my son, my only child. He lives in Valentine, a posh Charlotte suburb about 40 minutes away. He'd moved there after a big promotion, into a house with a bright red door that looked like it belonged in a magazine. We weren't close, not the way I saw other mothers and sons be. Our relationship was a series of missed calls and awkward holiday dinners. But he was blood. He was all the family I had left. My hands trembled so violently I could barely press the buttons on Mrs. Jenkins' phone. I held it to my ear, listening to the ring, each tone a hammer blow against my heart, once. Twice. David speaking. His voice was crisp, efficient. The voice he used at work. "David, darling, it's Mom." My own voice was a thin, reedy whisper. "Mom? What's going on? You sound upset. There was a fire, son." I squeezed my eyes shut. "The house. It's gone. Everything's gone." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I could hear the faint sounds of his office, a world away. "Were you hurt?" he finally asked. "No, I'm fine. Just a few scrapes. But David, I need a place to stay. Just while I figure things out. Just temporarily. Another pause. This one felt heavier, loaded with unspoken thoughts. Sure, Mom. Of course. Come on over. We'll work it out. The relief that washed over me was so intense, so physical, that my knees buckled. I had to lean against Mrs. Jenkins' wall for support. Tears, the first I'd been able to shed, welled in my eyes. My son, my boy. He would take care of me. Despite all the distance, he was still my child. The next morning, I stood amidst the charred ruins, waiting for the insurance adjuster. The air still stank of wet ash and defeat. He was a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He surveyed the wreckage with a clipboard and a camera. Total loss, he said, the words delivered with brutal, pragmatic finality. How much? I asked, dreading the answer. With your deductible and depreciation, we're talking maybe $90,000. Maybe less. $90,000 to rebuild 42 years of a life. The number was a mockery, Mrs. Jenkins took me to a Drabo discount store. Using the emergency money from the Red Cross, we bought the basics. 2 blouses, a pair of slacks, underwear, a toothbrush. Everything I now owned in the world fit into one small, borrowed suitcase. That was it. The sum total of Grace Roberts' life. The cab ride to David's house felt like a journey to another planet. Every familiar landmark, the gas station, the old diner seemed to belong to someone else's life now. I was just a ghost passing through. And then we entered Valentine. It was immaculate. Perfect lawns, perfect houses, perfect lives continuing untouched. I felt like an intruder, a crack in their perfect facade, bringing my soot-stained tragedy into their spotless world. His house came into view, the 2-story colonial, the white shutters, that bright red door his fiancée Victoria had chosen. I'd met her 3 times. She was 30, sharp and beautiful, and she made me feel obsolete. The cab pulled into the driveway. I sat there for a long moment, gathering my courage. This is temporary, I told myself. Just until I can find my feet. I won't be a burden. I never imagined that walking up to my own son's front door would be one of the hardest things I'd ever do. As I raised my hand to knock, a familiar, hollow feeling opened up in the pit of my stomach. It was the same feeling I'd had when the doctor told me Robert was gone. I just didn't know yet. I didn't know how much deeper I was about to fall. The door swung open before my knuckles could even graze the polished wood, as if my mere presence on the doorstep had tripped some silent alarm. David stood there, backlit by the clean, neutral light of his home. For one breathtaking, fleeting moment, seeing his familiar face, the same warm brown eyes his father had gifted him, the same stubborn set to his jaw that I saw in the mirror every morning of my life, a fragile, desperate wave of relief washed over me. This was my son, my little boy, the one I'd rock to, sleep through 100 thunderstorms, whose fevered brow I'd cooled with a damp cloth, whose tiny, trusting hand had once been swallowed up in mine. Surely, that history, that primal bond of blood and shared history, had to mean something. It had to be a stronger force than the polite distance that had grown between us over the years. "Mom," he said, stepping aside to let me cross the threshold, but the single word was off. It was flat, layered with a tension I couldn't quite place. Not quite cold, but distant. Careful, the way a store manager might greet a customer who looks like they might shoplift. It was the tone that made the hollow feeling in my stomach yawn wider, threatening to swallow me whole. I stepped into the entryway, and my cheap, newly bought sneakers sank into a plush, ivory-colored rug that probably cost more than my late husband's first car. The air smelled of lemony polish and something else, something faintly floral and unnervingly expensive. Vanilla and orchids, maybe. It was the complete, jarring opposite of the acrid, life-choking scent of smoke I'd carried in my nostrils and my hair for the past 2 days. This air was dead, filtered, sanitized. Victoria appeared behind him almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting in the wings for her cue. She was a vision of casual, calculated perfection. Cream-colored silk trousers that flowed like water, a simple but undoubtedly cashmere black top. Her rich brown hair swept back into one of those artfully messy buns that I knew took an hour and half a can of hairspray to achieve. Her smile was a precise, practiced curve of her lips, a perfect semicircle of welcome that never quite reached her eyes, which were already doing a swift, appraising inventory of me from my unstyled gray roots to my discount store slacks down to the sad, wheeled suitcase I clutched like a life preserver. "Grace," she said, her voice as smooth and cool as the marble floor under my feet. "How horrible about your house." The words were correct, the sentiment appropriate, but they landed with the weight of a feather, devoid of genuine warmth. She was looking at my ragged suitcase, not at me. David told me what happened. I became acutely, painfully conscious of how I must look. My new clothes, simple and cheap, seemed to scream their origin story against the polished, silent luxury of their hall. I could still smell the ghost of smoke clinging to me, a stubborn phantom of my tragedy, despite the long, hot shower I'd taken at Mrs. Jenkins' house. I was a smudge on their pristine world. I set my suitcase down carefully on the tile beside the rug, suddenly afraid its scuffed plastic wheels might leave a mark. "It's just temporary," I said quickly, the words tumbling out in a rush of reassurance for them or for myself. I wasn't sure. "Just until I can get back on my feet." The insurance adjuster came. "It should just be a few weeks, a month at most." David and Victoria exchanged a glance. One of those wordless, spousal conversations that happens in a microsecond, a silent transaction of raised eyebrows and slight facial tilts that excludes everyone else in the room. I'd seen Robert, and I do the same thing, countless times a quick, "Should we tell them now?" Or, "We need to leave soon." But from the outside, it felt different. It felt like they were shutting me out of a club I didn't know existed, deciding my fate in that single, silent look. "Let's sit down and talk," David said, his voice assuming a false soothing quality that set my nerves on edge. He guided me, not with a hand on my back, but with a slight gesture toward the living room, as if directing a delivery man. Their house was beautiful, in the way museum period rooms are beautiful. Everything matched with an almost militant coordination. Nothing was out of place. White, oversized furniture that looked like no human had ever actually relaxed on it. Glass coffee tables, so clear and pristine they were almost invisible, reflecting the cold, hard light from windows so clean they looked like open holes in the wall. It was the kind of house you were afraid to touch anything in, where you worried about leaving a fingerprint on a surface or a wrinkle on a cushion. It was a showroom, not a home. I sat on the very edge of an immaculate cream-colored sofa, perching like a bird about to take flight. I planted my feet firmly on the flawless, wide-plank hardwood, afraid to scuff it. Victoria noticed the deliberate placement of my shoes and flinched almost imperceptibly, a tiny tick at the corner of her eye. David settled into an armchair directly across from me, not next to me on the sofa where he could have put a comforting arm around his distraught mother, but opposite me, as if we were about to conduct a business negotiation. The coffee table between us felt like a moat. "So," David began, leaning forward and clasping his hands together. "What's the plan?" The question felt like a trap. I just told them the plan. Temporary. A few weeks. I repeated it, my voice sounding smaller now in the vast, echoing room. "Well, like I said, the insurance will take a few weeks to process. I was hoping I could stay here until then, just until I can find a small apartment or something I can afford." The silence that followed was a physical presence in the room. It stretched out, thick and heavy, for about 10 seconds longer than any comfortable silence should. I watched Victoria's face change. I saw the subtle tightening of her jaw, the almost imperceptible narrowing of her eyes. She leaned over and placed a perfectly manicured hand on David's arm, a gesture that looked supportive to an outsider but to me screamed possession, a silent command. "Now, Mom," David began, and I knew from the new, heavier tone, from the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes, that what was coming next would break my heart all over again. "The thing is, Victoria and I have been talking, and we really value our privacy here." He gestured vaguely around the sterile room. "We both work long, stressful hours, and this is our sanctuary, you know? Our place to decompress, if you know what I mean. I blinked, my mind struggling to catch up, to process the polite words that were forming a cruel, rejection-shaped meaning. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I wouldn't be in your way, I stammered, the desperation seeping into my voice. I'd keep to myself. I'll help with the cooking, the cleaning. I'm a good cook, David, you remember. I won't be a bother, I promise. Victoria leaned forward, her voice a soft, firm counterpoint to my rising panic. It's not about being a bother, Grace. She said my name like it was a word in a foreign language. It's about space, emotional and physical space. This house is our first home together, and we're still finding our rhythm as a couple, establishing our own dynamic. The clinical, therapeutic language felt like a weapon. I'm his mother, I said, the words coming out sharper, more ancient than I intended. They hung in the air, a primal truth against their modern psychology. Of course you are, Victoria replied smoothly, without a hint of hesitation. She was prepared for this, and that's precisely why we thought you'd be more comfortable somewhere else. Somewhere you can have your independence, your own space, while you rebuild. It's so important for people at our stage in life, to maintain their autonomy. Our stage in life. She'd almost said your age. She was 30. She had no concept of my stage in life, of the terror of facing it alone. I looked at David, my eyes pleading, begging him to contradict her, to remember. To remember that I was the woman who had stayed up with him through every childhood fever, who had read him The Cat in the Hat so many times I could still recite it from memory. I was the one who had worked double shifts as a bank teller to help pay for his college textbooks, who had held his hand through his devastating divorce 3 years ago, when his first wife left him for her personal trainer, when he'd sobbed in my kitchen that he was a failure. I had been his sanctuary then. Instead, he nodded, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere past my left shoulder. Victoria's right, Mom. We think you'd be happier with your own space. The words hit me with the force of a physical punch. I actually felt my chest constrict, a tight, painful squeeze as if someone were wringing out my lungs. Happier? The word was a choked whisper. David, I lost everything yesterday. Everything. My home, my photos, every single thing your father and I ever built together. And you think I'd be happier alone in a hotel room than here, with my family? It doesn't have to be a hotel. Victoria interjected quickly, her voice bright with false solutions. There are some lovely extended stay places near the mall. The residence suites, very clean, very safe. They have little kitchenettes so you can cook for yourself. It's really quite comfortable. I stared at this woman, this stranger who had been in my son's life for a mere 2 years, as she calmly, politely told me where I should live after losing my home of 40 years. She was mapping out my exile with the detached efficiency of a travel agent. And how? I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of fury and devastation. Am I supposed to pay for this lovely extended stay place? The insurance money won't arrive for weeks. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the leather groaning softly beneath him. I could help out with that. For a little while. I could give you a few $100 to get you started. A few $100? The phrase dropped from my lips like a stone. As if I were a distant cousin he barely knew, not the woman who had given him life, who had sacrificed for him without a second thought. The indignity of it was a fresh, searing burn. David, I said, my voice barely a whisper, scraping the bottom of my soul. I changed your diapers. I rocked you for hours through your colic when you screamed so hard your face turned purple. I taught you how to ride a bike on Elm Street, running behind you until I was breathless. I held you when you cried because Lucia Velasco broke your heart in the 10th grade and you thought your life was over. I was throwing the scrapbook of his life at his feet, demanding he look at it. His face twisted slightly, a flicker of the boy I knew surfacing through the mask of the man he'd become. But Victoria squeezed his arm harder, her knuckles turning white. A silent reminder. Stay strong. Don't cave. No one's questioning your history, Grace, she said, her voice losing its soft edge, becoming firmer, more final. We're all very aware of the sacrifices you've made. We just think that for everyone's well-being some healthy boundaries need to be established. Boundaries. The word echoed in the sterile room. I'd heard that word from the therapist David had seen after his divorce. It was the buzzword that justified every act of selfishness, that sanitized every rejection. It was a shield they were using to keep me out. You're kicking me out, I said flatly. The words were raw, stripped of all pretense. There was no polite way to say it now. We're not kicking you out, David protested, a flash of irritation in his eyes, as if I were being deliberately difficult, melodramatic. We're just saying that this arrangement, you living here, wouldn't work for anyone in the long run. Whose idea was this? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I could see it in the way Victoria leaned back slightly, a barely there movement of satisfaction, as if she had just successfully navigated a difficult corporate merger. She had won. We discussed it together, David said, but his gaze dropped to his hands. He was lying. He was a terrible liar, just like his father. He'd never been able to look me in the eye when he wasn't telling the truth. A profound, bone-deep weariness settled over me. I felt every one of my 65 years, every loss, every disappointment, crystallize in that moment. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking in a way that was a cruel, audible reminder of my age, my vulnerability, my aloneness in the world. I understand, I said, my voice strangely calm. The fight had gone out of me, leaving only a cold, clear emptiness. Mom, don't be like that, David said, standing up as well, looking uneasy, but not uneasy enough to change his mind. Not uneasy enough to say, forget it, stay. We're trying to do what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone. I repeated the words as if they were in a foreign language, tasting their absurdity. What would be best for everyone, David, is if your mother didn't have to sleep on the street tonight. Is that part of the plan you discussed together? Victoria's perfectly made-up face contorted into a mask of pained concern. You don't have to sleep on the street. Like I said, there are options. I looked around the flawless living room one last time. My eyes took in the family photos on the mantel. David and Victoria on a ski trip, David and Victoria at a black tie event, David and Victoria with friends. There were no photos of me. There was no evidence that David had a life before her, a history that didn't include her. I looked at the expensive furniture no one was allowed to truly live on, at my son who had chosen this cold, beautiful woman and her world of boundaries over his own mother. You're right, I finally said, the calmness in my voice surprising even me. There are always options. I bent down and picked up my small suitcase. Its weight felt exponentially heavier now that I knew it contained not just my few belongings, but the crushing knowledge that I was not welcome in my only child's home. I'll call you in a few days, David said, following me to the door, his hands shoved into his pockets. As soon as you get settled somewhere, we can figure this out. Don't bother, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. It was the voice of a woman who had nothing left to lose. I wouldn't want to invade your sanctuary. Victoria had the decency to look slightly ashamed, her gaze dropping to the floor. But it wasn't enough. Not enough to speak up. Not enough to say, wait, this is wrong. She's your mother. She stays. I walked out of that perfect house with its perfect couple and its perfect, soul-crushing boundaries. I didn't look back. I closed the red door behind me, the click of the latch a sound of finality, a period at the end of the sentence of our relationship. The first night in the hotel was a lesson in a new kind of silence. It wasn't the comfortable, memory-filled quiet of my old home, but a hollow, echoing void, punctuated by the sounds of a world that had no idea I existed. The thrum of the highway was a constant dull roar, like the breath of some sleeping giant. Doors slammed in distant corridors, a toilet flushed through the wall with a violent, gasping whoosh. Laughter, sharp and sudden, would drift up from the parking lot, belonging to people with places to go, lives to live. I lay on the thin, unforgiving mattress, the sheets feeling coarse and alien against my skin, and stared at the water-stained ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw two things, flashing in a cruel alternating current: the hungry, orange flames consuming my curtains, and the cold, closed expression on my son's face as he showed me the door. The morning came, gray and unwelcome, seeping through the slats of the blinds. My body ached in protest, my back a tight knot of pain from the mattress, my neck stiff. I felt a decade older than I had just 2 days ago. Grief, I was learning, was a physical weight. The money was a living, shrinking thing. I counted it out on the small, sticky table. The emergency cash was almost gone. I had my debit card, but the balance was meager, meant for groceries and utilities, not for funding a life in limbo. Panic, cold and slick, began to coil in my stomach. What happened when this ran out? The insurance money was a distant, abstract promise. The lovely extended stay place Victoria had mentioned was a fantasy land I could never afford to enter. My options were narrowing to a very dark, very tight point. I spent the day in a state of suspended animation. I washed my 2 blouses and 1 pair of slacks in the small bathroom sink with a tiny bar of soap, wringing them out and hanging them over the single plastic chair to dry. The room now smelled of damp laundry and despair. I ventured out once, to a convenience store across the street, to buy a cheap loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a bunch of bananas. It was to be my sustenance. The act of buying it felt shameful, a confirmation of my new status. And through it all, the business card sat on the nightstand. It was a magnet for my eyes. I would try to read the faded, outdated thriller novel I'd bought at the airport years ago, and my gaze would drift back to it. I would stare out the window at the traffic, and its presence was a physical pull in my periphery. It was no longer just a piece of cardstock, it was a Pandora's box. It held the ghost of a young woman I used to be, and the potential for a humiliation so profound it might just be the final blow that shattered me. On the second night, unable to sleep, I finally picked it up. The paper was so soft, so pliable from 4 decades of being carried in wallets and purses, that it felt like felt. I handled it with the reverence of an archaeologist handling a fragile scroll, Randall Galloway. The name was written in a bold, confident script, the blue ink now faded to a soft gray blue. Beneath it was a phone number with an area code I didn't recognize. And on the back, in my own youthful, looping handwriting, were the words, "Never forget." I had written those words when I was 25, sitting on the hood of his car at the overlook, the lights of Charlotte twinkling below us like a carpet of fallen stars. I had believed, with the absolute, unshakable certainty of youth, that Randall Galloway was the great love of my life. He was 26, with a head of dark, unruly hair that constantly fell over his forehead, and eyes the color of golden amber that seemed to see straight into the heart of you. He smelled of sawdust and ambition. He'd just started working for his father's small construction company after college, but his mind was already building empires. "I'm not going to just build houses, Grace," he'd tell me, his arm around my shoulders, his voice vibrating with passion. "I'm going to build something that matters, something that lasts. I'm going to start my own company. Development. Real estate. I'm going to make myself rich enough to give you everything you deserve." He was all fire and future. Robert, whom I would meet just a year later, was all steady, gentle earth. Robert promised me a home, a family, security. Randall promised me the world. The night before he left for a 6-month project in Atlanta, a project he said would be his springboard, we'd stood on my parents' porch. He'd held my face in his hands, his amber eyes intense in the porch light. "I'll come back for you, Grace," he'd whispered, his thumb stroking my cheek. "I'm going to make something of myself, and then I'm going to come back and marry you. I promise." And I, a young woman raised on fairy tales and the solid values of a North Carolina upbringing, had believed him. I'd pressed this card into my palm, a tangible piece of him. "Never forget," I'd written on the back, a vow to myself as much as a message to him. He wrote letters at first. Long, passionate, sprawling letters full of dreams and blueprints and a loneliness that echoed my own. Atlanta is big and loud, but all I can think about is the quiet on the overlook with you. I met a guy today who might be an investor. I miss the smell of your perfume. I wrote back just as fervently, telling him about my job at the bank, about my life on pause, waiting, just as I'd promised. But then, life, as it always does, intervened. The letters grew shorter, the gaps between them longer. The passionate dreams were replaced with the dry details of business setbacks and logistical problems. The loneliness in his words was replaced by a weary preoccupation. The project was extended, then extended again. When I met Robert at a church picnic 6 months later, he felt like a safe harbor after a turbulent sea. He was 32, already settled in his job at the phone company. He didn't promise me the world. He promised me a corner of it that would be ours, forever. He was kind, reliable, and he was here. When he proposed after 5 months of steady, comfortable dating, I said yes. It felt like the grown-up thing to do. The sensible choice. The day I packed for my wedding, I found Randall's last letter, tucked in a drawer. I read it one last time, then I put it, along with all the others, in a box. But the business card. I couldn't throw it away. It was a secret, a tiny shard of that other, more passionate girl I had been. I slipped it into the pocket of my wedding dress, a hidden talisman as I walked down the aisle toward my safe, steady future. I'd transferred it to every wallet I'd owned since. Over the years, I'd followed his life in the way you do with first loves through the faint, distant radar of mutual acquaintances. A friend of a friend would say, "Did you hear? Randall Galloway started his own firm." Another would mention, "He's building that new shopping center out on Highway 70. The whispers grew more impressive. His company expanded. He never married, which surprised everyone. Married to his work, they'd say. That Galloway, always so ambitious. The last I'd heard, maybe 8 years ago, his company, Galloway Development, had projects in Atlanta, Miami, all over the globe. Southeast. The young man from the construction company was now a titan, a man in expensive suits who made decisions that shaped skylines. And what was I? A 65-year-old widow in a budget hotel, with a suitcase of clothes from a discount store and a heart shattered by her own child. What would that man, that successful, powerful stranger, want with me? The rational part of my brain, the part that had balanced checkbooks and raised a son, screamed that it was ridiculous. Pathetic. You don't call a man after 40 years because your life has fallen apart. You don't look up your young love when you're old, desperate, and have nowhere to go. It was the stuff of bad television movies, not real life. But rational thought is a luxury for those who have choices. When you're counting the crumpled bills in your wallet and calculating how many nights at the Restwell Inn they can buy, rationality becomes a distant, irrelevant concept. All that is left is raw, desperate need. On the third morning, I couldn't take it anymore. The hotel had left a notice under my door. They needed the room for a pre-existing booking tomorrow. I had one more night. After that, the abyss. I sat at the room's little table, the business card placed squarely in front of me like a dare. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. What would I even say? "Hello, Randall. You probably don't remember me. It's Grace. Grace Thorne. Well, Robert now. My house burned down, my son doesn't want me, and I have nowhere to go. Can you spare a few $1,000s and a little pity?" The number was probably disconnected. It would ring to some empty office, or a secretary would answer, her voice crisp and efficient. "I'm sorry, Mr. Galloway is in a meeting divided by in another country divided by too important to take calls from homeless women claiming to be old flames. The humiliation of that alone might kill me. But what if it wasn't? What if, by some miracle, he answered? The what if was a tiny, stubborn ember in the cold ashes of my hope. It was the only ember I had left. The fourth morning arrived, my last in the hotel. I had run out of excuses, out of time, out of everything. I had to leave today. I had to go. Somewhere. The shelter. The street. The thought filled me with a primal terror. I sat at the table again, the card in my hand. The phone on the nightstand seemed to mock me. This was it. The cliff's edge. My heart was a wild, frantic drum against my ribs, so loud I was sure the people in the next room could hear it. My mouth was dry as dust. With a shaking finger, I dialed the number on the card. Each digit was a monumental effort, a step off a cliff into the unknown. It rang. Once. My breath caught. Twice. I almost slammed the receiver down. This was insanity. Then, a click. A connection. A voice. A man's voice. Deeper than I remembered, weathered by time and authority, but unmistakably, undeniably, his. It was a voice I would have recognized anywhere, even after 100 years. "Galloway Development, Randall speaking," he answered. Just like that, he answered his own phone. The world tilted on its axis. I almost hung up. My thumb hovered over the button, my entire body screaming at me to abort this madness, to preserve what little dignity I had left. But something in his tone, a directness, a warmth that seemed to cut through the phone lines and the 40 years between us, wrapped around me like a blanket. It made me speak. "Randall," I choked out, my voice a dry, rusty croak. It's Grace. Grace Thorne." "Well, I'm Grace Robert now, but I used to be Thorne." Silence. It was long enough for me to think the call had dropped. Long enough for me to believe he'd hung up. Long enough to be certain he had no idea who I was, that I was just a crazy old woman wasting his time. Then, a single word. My name. Said not as a question, but as a statement. A prayer. A wonder. Grace. The way he said it. It was as if he'd been holding that single word in his mouth for 40 years, waiting for the chance to release it. The dam inside me broke. "I'm so sorry to call like this." I rushed, the words tumbling out in a torrent of desperation, a frantic attempt to explain before he could hang up. "I know it's been a lifetime and I probably shouldn't be calling, but I just didn't know who else to turn to, and where are you?" He interrupted, his voice sharp, cutting through my panic with an authority that was both startling and deeply comforting. "I'm in Charlotte, at a hotel called the Restwell Inn, and I know this sounds crazy, but my house burned down last week. I lost everything, and my son. My son doesn't want me to stay with him, and I have nowhere to go." The confession spilled out, each word a piece of my shattered pride. Admitting that my own child had rejected me was the most humiliating part of all, a final admission of failure. "Give me the exact address," Randall said, his voice now entirely professional, decisive. "I'm coming to get you." The world stopped. "You don't have to do that." I don't know why I called. I guess I just needed to hear a friendly voice. I was backpedaling, terrified of the reality of what was happening. "Grace." His tone was a command. It allowed no discussion, no argument. It was the voice of a man who was used to being obeyed. "Tell me where you are. I'm walking to my car right now." Over the phone, I could hear it. The sound of a door closing, with a solid, expensive thud. The distinct chime of a luxury car unlocking. The powerful purr of an engine starting. He was really coming. This man I hadn't spoken to in 4 decades was dropping whatever multi-million-dollar deal he was in the middle of to rescue me from a $30 a night hotel. A sob caught in my throat. I gave him the address, my voice barely a whisper. "Randall, look, I'm not the girl you remember." A soft sound, almost a chuckle. "Neither am I," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, a familiar, devastating warmth. "But I've been waiting 40 years for this call." The line went dead. The hour that followed his phone call was the longest of my life, a strange, suspended purgatory perched on the crumbling edge between ruin and rescue. The buzzing dial tone had been a full stop on my old life. The silence that replaced it was the blank page of whatever came next. My first instinct was to pack, a frantic, fluttering energy taking over my limbs. I zipped the meager contents of my borrowed suitcase, the 2 blouses, the single pair of slacks, the pitiful collection of toiletries, and then unzipped it to check, and then check again. As if my few possessions might have vanished in the intervening minutes. My hands wouldn't be still. They trembled as I smoothed the wrinkles from my clothes, a futile gesture against the cheap, unforgiving fabric. Then, the panic set in. What was I doing? This was insanity woven from desperation. A man I hadn't seen in 40 years was driving to a pay-by-the-hour hotel to pick up his elderly, destitute former girlfriend. The narrative was so absurd it was almost comical. He would take one look at me, at the deep lines of grief and disappointment etched around my eyes, at the gray roots stark against my faded hair dye, at the cheap, ill-fitting clothes that screamed of my downfall, and the romantic fantasy he'd apparently clung to for decades would shatter into a million pieces. The kindness in his voice would curdle into pity, and the pity would quickly harden into a polite, horrified obligation. He would write a check, usher me gently but firmly into a cab, and that would be the end of it. The hope I was feeling was a dangerous, volatile substance, and I was playing with fire all over again. I paced the short, worn length of the carpet, from the bathroom door to the window and back again. 12 steps, a prison cell. With each turn I argued with myself. You should call him back. Tell him you made a mistake. Spare yourself the humiliation. But he said he'd been waiting 40 years for the call. He was being poetic. He was caught off guard. No one waits 40 years. He sounded so sure. His voice, it was the same. I stopped at the window, pulling the stiff, dusty blinds aside just enough to peer out. The parking lot was a sad tableau of potholes and discarded fast food wrappers. People came and went, their lives momentarily intersecting with mine in this place of transience. A family loaded suitcases into a minivan, the children laughing. A truck driver smoked a cigarette, his face weary. None of them knew that inside room 114, a woman's entire future was hanging by the thinnest, most fragile of threads. What did he look like now? The boy I remembered was all sharp angles and restless energy lean, with dark, unruly hair and eyes that held the Sunday time would have softened those angles, weathered that skin. Success would have filled him out, given him a different kind of presence. Would I even recognize him? Would he see the ghost of the 25-year-old Grace in my 65-year-old face? I thought of Robert. A sharp pang of guilt, unexpected and unwelcome, lanced through me. Was I betraying him? Our marriage had been a good one, a solid one, built on trust and companionship. But it had never been this. It had never been this kind of terrifying, all-or-nothing leap of faith. Robert would have wanted me to be safe, to be cared for. But would he have wanted this? I pushed the thought away. Robert was gone. My life with him was ash. I couldn't afford the luxury of guilt anymore. The sound of a smooth, powerful engine, distinct from the rattle of trucks and the sputter of compacts, cut through the ambient noise of the highway. My heart seized. A silver Mercedes, so polished it seemed to draw all the dull, gray light from the parking lot and reflect it back as a cool, brilliant shine, glided to a stop directly in front of my window. It was sleek, silent, and utterly alien in this setting. It looked like a spaceship that had landed on a dirt road. The windows were tinted, so I couldn't see inside, but I knew. Something deep in my chest, in my soul, a string that had been plucked 40 years ago, and had hummed at a low, steady frequency ever since, suddenly resonated. It was him. The driver's side door opened. Time didn't just slow down, it fractured. The sounds of the world faded into a dull roar, and my vision tunneled, focusing on that single, unfolding moment. A man stepped out. Even after 40 years, even with the gray peppering his temples and the lines that mapped a lifetime of decisions around his eyes, even carrying the weight of decades and successes I hadn't shared with him, I recognized him immediately. It was in the way he moved, a relaxed confidence that was now refined, polished by experience. It was in the set of his shoulders, broader now, more solid. He was dressed not in a suit, but in dark jeans and a navy blue sweater that looked impossibly soft and undoubtedly cost more than I used to spend on a month's worth of groceries. He was a man who had arrived, in every sense of the word. He didn't look around with distaste or uncertainty. He simply closed the car door and looked up, his gaze scanning the row of motel room doors until it landed on my window, on the sliver of my face visible through the blinds. Our eyes met, and the years crumbled. The 4 decades that stood between us, the marriages, the children, the careers, the losses dissolved into nothing. In that single, silent look. We were just Randall and Grace again, and the world was full of nothing but possibility. A jolt of pure, undiluted terror shot through me. I wanted to hide. I wanted to duck below the windowsill, to lock the door, to pretend I wasn't here. I looked terrible. My hair was a mess, my clothes were wrinkled, and I felt small and insignificant next to the elegant, assured man standing beside that gleaming car. I was a relic from a forgotten era, and he was the man who had built the new one. But he was already smiling. A slow, genuine smile that started in those incredible amber eyes and spread to his mouth. A smile that made my heart jump and stutter as if I were 25 again, standing on my parents' porch. He was here. For me. That was the thought that broke the paralysis. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase, my fingers gripping it like a lifeline, and I hurried out the door and down the short, concrete staircase. I moved with a speed I didn't know I possessed, driven by a fear that this dream would vanish if I waited too long, that he would get back in his car and drive away, leaving me in this purgatory forever. He was waiting for me by the passenger door. As I approached, I could see the changes time had etched into him more clearly. The laugh lines were deeper, the hair at his temples a distinguished silver. He was more solid, more present than the lean young man I remembered. But when he looked at me, I saw him. The boy who dreamed under the stars. The man who had kept a promise I never knew he'd made. I walked toward him slowly, my legs feeling like water, suddenly unable to breathe. The distance between us felt immense, a chasm of lost time. "Hello, Grace," he said softly. His voice was just as it had been on the phone, deeper, richer, but with that same underlying warmth that felt like coming home. "Hello," I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. I stopped a few feet from him, clutching my suitcase in front of me like a shield. He studied my face for a long, quiet moment, those amber eyes taking in every detail, the lines of grief, the shadows of exhaustion, the traces of tears I knew were still there. I wanted to apologize. I wanted to explain away the years, to tell him I used to be prettier, happier, more whole. I wanted to tell him he didn't have to do this, that I would understand if he changed his mind. Instead, he said 3 words. 3 simple words, spoken with a quiet, unwavering certainty that changed the axis of my world. "You look beautiful." And I broke, completely and utterly. Right there, on the cracked asphalt of the Restwell Inn parking lot, with the traffic roaring beside us and the sun glinting off his expensive car, I fell apart. 40 years of pent-up tears for the love I'd lost, for the son who'd rejected me, for the home that was gone, for the woman I used to be, came pouring out in great, heaving, ugly sobs that I had no hope of controlling. It was an avalanche of grief and relief, so powerful it bent me double. I felt a gentle pressure as he took my suitcase from my numb fingers. Then, his other arm went around me, strong and sure, as I collapsed against his chest. I buried my face in the soft wool of his sweater, my body shaking with the force of my weeping. He smelled of expensive cologne, something clean and woody, and of clean laundry, and beneath it all, the faint, comforting scent of him. A scent my soul remembered even if my mind had forgotten. He smelled of success and stability, of everything I had lost and everything I had never dared to hope for again. He didn't say anything else. He didn't try to shush me or offer empty platitudes. He didn't tell me everything would be all right. He simply held me. His hand stroked my back in slow, steady circles, a grounding, rhythmic motion as I cried out a lifetime of sorrow onto the shoulder of a man I hadn't seen in 4 decades. It was the first time since the fire that anyone had held me. The first time since Robert died that I had allowed myself to be this vulnerable. When the storm finally began to subside, leaving me spent and hollowed out, I pulled away, embarrassed by the damp, dark patch I'd left on his beautiful sweater. I wiped at my face with my hands, which were still trembling. "I'm sorry," I choked out, avoiding his gaze. "I'm sorry, Randall. I shouldn't have called. I shouldn't be dragging you into this mess." "Shh," he murmured, his hand coming up to gently wipe a stray tear from my cheek with his thumb. His touch was as gentle as a whisper. "You should have called years ago." I let out a shaky, bitter laugh. Years ago, I wasn't a homeless, crying mess in a parking lot. He reached out and tilted my chin up, forcing me to meet his eyes. They were serious now. You look like someone who has been through hell and survived it. That's not a mess, Grace. That's strength. Strength? The word felt foreign on my tongue. I'm 65 years old. I'm staying in a dive hotel because my own son doesn't want me. That's not strength. That's pathetic. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I saw a flash of something hard and angry in his eyes, an emotion he was trying to keep in check for my sake. Your son is a fool, he said, his voice low and firm. You don't know him, I whispered. I don't need to know him. I know you. He paused, his hands resting lightly on my shoulders, his gaze holding mine. Or at least, I knew you. And the Grace Thorne I knew would never turn away someone in need, especially family. The way he said my maiden name Thorne, as if it were something precious he'd been safeguarding all these years, made my chest ache with a profound, bittersweet longing for the girl I used to be. That was a long time ago, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I'm not that girl anymore. Maybe not, he agreed, a small, understanding smile touching his lips. But I'd like to meet the woman she became. The world outside the tinted windows of Randall's car blurred into a stream of unfamiliar colors and shapes. We left behind the commercial strip with its garish signs and desperate energy, moving instead through a series of increasingly beautiful neighborhoods. The transition was so gradual, so seamless, it felt like we were ascending through layers of a different world, leaving the grim reality of my past life further and further behind. First, the tidy middle-class subdivisions gave way to wider streets with larger homes set back on manicured lawns. Then, the trees grew older, their branches forming a canopy over the road. The houses became estates, hidden behind discreet stone walls and wrought iron gates. I caught glimpses of them through the foliage, timber and stone mansions, modern architectural marvels of glass and steel, all projecting an aura of immense, quiet wealth. The mailboxes alone were small works of art, sculptures that probably cost more than my first car. I sat in silence, my hands folded in my lap, stealing glances at Randall's profile. He drove with an easy confidence, one hand resting lightly on the steering wheel. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was a living thing, filled with the ghosts of our shared past and the overwhelming reality of our present. I could feel the questions piling up behind my lips, but I was afraid to give them voice, afraid to break the spell. He seemed to sense my turmoil. It's about another 20 minutes, he said, his voice calm, breaking the quiet without shattering it. We're headed toward Lake Norman. I just nodded, my throat too tight for words. Lake Norman was where the old money lived, the captains of industry and the heirs to fortunes. It was a world I had only ever seen in the glossy pages of Charlotte magazine. We turned off the main highway onto a narrower, winding road that snaked through rolling, forested hills. The properties here were even more secluded, the driveways longer, the gates more imposing. Finally, Randall slowed the car and turned into a driveway, marked only by a small, understated brass plaque set into a low stone wall. It bore a single, elegantly scripted word, Galloway. The driveway was a journey in itself. It curved through a tunnel of mature oak and maple trees, their branches interlaced overhead like the vaulted ceiling of a cathedral. Sunlight dappled the paved surface, creating a shifting pattern of light and shadow. To the right, I caught glimpses of manicured gardens, bursts of color from flowering bushes, and meticulously arranged perennials. It wasn't a yard, it was a landscape designed by an artist. Then, the trees opened up, and the house came into view. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious. It was magnificent. A low-slung, elegant structure of stone and dark timber and glass, built to blend into the natural slope of the land rather than dominate it. It had a solid, permanent feel, as if it had grown from the hill itself. Tall, clean-lined windows reflected the sky and the surrounding trees. A wide, welcoming porch, furnished with comfortable-looking chairs and a swing, wrapped around one side of the house. It was the kind of house that spoke not of new money trying to prove something, but of old, established success that had nothing left to prove. "Randall," I whispered, my voice full of awe. This is incredible." He brought the car to a stop in the circular gravel entrance but didn't immediately get out. He sat for a moment, looking at the house as if he were seeing it through my eyes. "It's too big," he said quietly, a surprising note of melancholy in his voice. "It always has been. I built it thinking I'd fill it one day. With a family. With noise." He shrugged, a gesture so familiar, so reminiscent of the young man he'd been, that it made my heart ache. Some dreams don't work out the way you planned. The confession hung in the quiet air of the car. It was an opening, a door into the life he'd lived without me. "You never married?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, before I could consider if it was too personal, too soon. He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable for a moment. The amber of his eyes seemed to darken with memory. "I came close a couple of times," he said, his gaze steady on mine. "Smart women. Beautiful women. But something was always missing." He paused, the silence stretching for a single heartbeat. Then he said the word, simple, devastating, and final. "You." The air left my lungs. That single syllable seemed to echo in the luxurious cabin, charged with the weight of 4 decades of what-ifs and could-have-beens. I wanted to ask him what he meant. I wanted to understand how I, a woman he hadn't seen since we were young, could have been the missing piece in a life I was never a part of. But the words wouldn't come. They were lodged in my throat, tangled with emotion. Before I could find my voice, he was already out of the car, rounding the front to open my door. The moment was broken, but its resonance lingered, settling deep inside me. He led me to the front door, a massive piece of beautifully grained wood, and pushed it open. "Welcome," he said softly. If the exterior was impressive, the interior was breathtaking. The entryway soared 2 stories high, with a staircase sweeping gracefully to the upper floor. The floors were wide plank hardwood, the color of warm honey, gleaming softly. The furniture was a masterful blend of modern comfort and timeless craftsmanship, clean lines, rich fabrics, pieces that looked both expensive and inviting. But what struck me most was that it didn't feel like a museum. There were books everywhere, stacked on tables, filling floor-to-ceiling shelves. A pair of reading glasses rested on an open newspaper. A soft, cashmere throw was draped over the arm of a deep, comfortable-looking sofa. Photographs were scattered on side tables, not the stiff, formal portraits of David's house, but candid shots of Randall with friends, on boats, at job sites, laughing. This was a home where someone actually lived. "Are you hungry?" Randall asked, leading me through the open living area into a kitchen that was larger than my entire first apartment. It was a chef's dream, with professional-grade appliances, a massive central island of honed granite, and a stunning view of the backyard and the lake beyond through a wall of glass doors. I was about to make lunch when you called. The mention of food made my stomach clench. I realized I was starving. The meager hotel breakfast of stale toast and weak coffee felt like a lifetime ago. My body was cramping with a combination of emptiness and frayed nerves. "I don't want to be any trouble," I began, the automatic response of a lifetime of not wanting to impose. He cut me off with a look, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that silenced me. "Grace, stop. You are not trouble." He paused, searching for the right words, his gaze softening. "You are the answer to a question I've been asking for 40 years. He moved to the refrigerator, pulling out fresh vegetables, chicken breasts, a bottle of olive oil. And he cooked. Not like a man fumbling his way through a kitchen, but with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to take care of himself. He chopped an onion with swift, precise movements, seasoned the chicken with salt and pepper from a mill, tossed vegetables in a bowl with herbs and oil. I stood there, leaning against the island, watching him, feeling like I was in a dream. While he worked, I let my eyes wander the room, taking in the details. The photographs I'd seen earlier were even more telling up close. There was Randall, younger, cutting a ribbon at some grand opening, shaking hands with politicians. There he was at black tie galas, always with a beautiful, elegant woman on his arm, a blonde in a sequin gown, a brunette in sleek velvet. They were all smiling, but in every picture, Randall's smile, while genuine, never quite reached the quiet contentment I saw in the candid shots of him alone with a book or with his dog. "Tell me about your life," he said, his back to me as he placed the chicken in a sizzling pan. The sound and the smell were overwhelmingly comforting. "Tell me about Robert, about your son, about everything I missed." So, over the next hour, as he moved efficiently around the kitchen, I did. Seated at the island on a tall stool with a glass of cool water he'd placed in front of me, I told him the story of my life. I spoke of my marriage to Robert, steady, comfortable, built on a foundation of mutual respect and deep affection, if not the passionate fire I'd known with Randall. I told him about David, the baby I had wanted so desperately, the son I had loved with a ferocity that sometimes frightened me, who had grown into a stranger who valued his fiancée's comfort over his mother's basic needs. My voice shook as I recounted the fire, the total, utter loss, and the final, soul-crushing rejection at David's perfect red door. Randall listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice, didn't try to fix it. He just listened, his amber eyes never leaving my face, his presence a quiet, solid anchor in the storm of my memories. He placed a plate in front of me, perfectly grilled chicken, roasted asparagus, and cherry tomatoes that tasted like summer, a small salad with a light vinaigrette. It was the first real, good food I'd had in days, and it tasted like heaven. When I finished, my story laid bare between us on the polished granite, he was silent for a long moment. He came around the island and sat on the stool next to me. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice low and heartfelt. "I'm sorry about Robert. He sounded like a good man. I'm sorry about your house, about all the memories you lost. And I'm so damn sorry about your son." He reached across the space between us and took my hand in his. It was still strong, still gentle, and the touch still sent a jolt of electricity up my arm, straight to my heart. "But I'm not sorry that you called me." "Why?" The question came out smaller than I intended, a child's plea for reassurance. His fingers tightened around mine. "Because I never stopped loving you, Grace," he said quietly, his gaze unwavering. It's a crazy thing to say after 40 years, I know, but it's the truth. Every deal I made, every building I raised, every success I achieved, every dollar I earned, it was all so I could be worthy of you. So that if you ever did come back to me, I'd have something to offer you. Something better than the dreams of a 26-year-old kid. Tears welled in my eyes again, but they were different this time. They weren't tears of grief or despair. They were tears of awe, of a profound, healing recognition. "Randall, we're different people now." "I know," he agreed, a small smile touching his lips. "And that's what makes it better, you're real. You've lived and loved and lost and survived. That 25-year-old girl was beautiful, but she was only potential. You." He lifted his other hand and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from my cheek. "You are the woman that potential grew up to be. And you are even more remarkable than I ever imagined." The words settled around my heart like a warm blanket, soothing wounds I didn't even know I was still carrying. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt seen. Not as someone's mother, or someone's wife, or someone's burden. But as Grace. Just Grace. He stood, still holding my hand. "Come on," he said. "Let me show you where you'll be staying." He led me down a hallway off the main living area and opened a door. "This is the guest suite," he said, "but I hope you'll think of it as your room." I stepped inside and caught my breath. It was larger than my entire living room had been. A king-sized bed with a simple, elegant wooden frame was piled with pillows and a soft-looking duvet. A sitting area with a comfortable-looking love seat and an armchair was arranged in front of a fireplace. French doors led out to a small, private patio overlooking the garden. The ensuite bathroom had a deep, soaking tub and a separate glass-walled shower. It was more luxurious than any hotel I had ever seen. "Randall, this is too much," I protested, feeling overwhelmed. "It's just a room, Grace," he said softly from the doorway. It's been empty for too long. Make yourself at home. There are fresh towels in the bathroom. Take a bath, take a nap, whatever you need. I'll be out in the kitchen if you need anything." He gave my hand one last squeeze and then closed the door gently behind him, leaving me alone in the beautiful silent room. I stood there for a long time, just breathing it in. The air was clean and still. I walked to the French doors and looked out at the garden, at the serene, blue slice of Lake Norman in the distance. I thought of the peeling wallpaper and the gritty carpet of the hotel room. I thought of the cold, sterile perfection of David's living room. And then I looked around this space, a sanctuary of warmth and understated luxury, offered without conditions, without a time limit. I walked to the bed and sat down on the edge, the mattress firm yet yielding beneath me. I ran my hand over the soft, high-thread Count Duvet cover. This wasn't just a room, it was a promise. A beginning. The fire had taken my old life. It had consumed it and turned it to ash. But as I sat in the quiet peace of Randall Galloway's home, I allowed myself to believe, for the first time, that the ashes weren't the end of the story. Maybe they were just the fertile ground from which something new, something truly beautiful, could finally grow. The first few days in Randall's house were a study in surreal politeness. We moved around each other like two planets in a newly discovered solar system, careful not to disrupt the other's orbit. I tiptoed. I folded my towels into perfect, precise rectangles in the bathroom. I made my bed with military corners, leaving no trace of my presence. I was a ghost in his beautiful machine, terrified of leaving a smudge on the perfection. He was patient, in the way only a man who has built an empire through persistence can be. He never commented on my excessive neatness, never made me feel like an intruder. He simply created space for me, both physically and emotionally. The guest suite was a world unto itself, but its luxury was a cage of my own making. I felt like I was staying in a museum after hours, afraid to touch the exhibits. The first morning, I woke at dawn, my body still conditioned by a lifetime of early rising. I crept out into the main living area, expecting silence. Instead, I found Randall in the kitchen, already dressed in casual trousers and a button-down shirt, the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee filling the air. "Morning," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. He held up a second mug. "Coffee? You didn't have to." I started, the automatic response of a guest. He finished the sentence for me, a gentle smile in his eyes. "Make coffee for you?" I know, I wanted to. He poured a cup and handed it to me. "Cream, sugar?" "Just black is fine," I said, my fingers curling around the warm ceramic. It was a beautiful, heavy mug, nothing like the thin, chipped ones I'd used for decades. He led me out to the back porch, a sprawling stone terrace that overlooked the terraced gardens and the glint of the lake beyond. The morning air was cool and clean, scented with damp earth and blooming jasmine. We sat in comfortable Adirondack chairs, and he opened a financial newspaper while I simply watched the world wake up. Hummingbirds darted between the feeders he kept stocked, their iridescent feathers catching the morning sunday. It was a peace so profound it felt almost painful, a stark contrast to the frantic panic that had been my constant companion for weeks. Later that day, I ventured into the kitchen while he was on a business call in his office. Maria, his housekeeper, had been there that morning, and the kitchen was spotless. But I felt a restless need to contribute, to earn my keep. I found a notepad and pen and started a grocery list, noting things I remembered him liking from our lunch: fresh herbs, good olive oil, the kind of cherry tomatoes that actually tasted like something. When he emerged from his office, he saw the list on the counter. "You don't need to do that, Grace," he said, but his tone was pleased, not scolding. "I'd like to," I said, and it was the truth. "If you'll let me. I'd like to cook dinner tonight." His face lit up with a boyish enthusiasm that made him look 20 years younger. "You have no idea how long it's been since someone cooked for me in this kitchen." So, that evening, I cooked. It was a simple meal: roasted chicken with lemon and rosemary, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds. The kind of comfort food that had been the bedrock of my family life. I moved around his kitchen, slowly learning where everything was, the professional stove intimidating at first, then becoming a familiar tool. When we sat down to eat at the small table in the breakfast nook, he took a bite of the chicken and closed his eyes. "My God, Grace," he said, his voice full of genuine wonder. "This is incredible. I haven't had a home-cooked meal like this in years." "It's nothing fancy," I protested, the familiar deflection rising to my lips. Inside, I glowed. When was the last time anyone had truly appreciated my cooking? David used to complain that I made the same 5 dishes over and over. Victoria had once suggested, with a condescending smile, that I try more contemporary flavors for family dinners. Randall shook his head, his gaze serious. "It's perfect. You're perfect." That word perfect should have made me uneasy. I was 65 with gray roots showing and expression lines that had become permanent grooves. My hands were spotted with age, my body soft in places that used to be firm. I was anything but perfect. But when Randall looked at me, I saw myself reflected in his eyes as someone beautiful, someone worthy of love and attention and gentle care. It was a powerful, intoxicating magic. We fell into routines that felt as natural as breathing, the initial stiffness melting away in the warmth of shared days. Mornings were for coffee on the porch. Afternoons, he would often suggest a walk around the property. He showed me the gardens he planted himself, not just for show, but with a deep, personal knowledge of each plant. He had a greenhouse, where he grew orchids as a hobby. Their exotic, intricate blooms a testament to his patience and attention to detail. "I never pictured you as a gardener," I said one afternoon, watching him carefully mist the delicate flowers. "It's good for the soul," he replied, not looking up from his task. "It teaches you that some of the most beautiful things require patience. You can't rush them." The evenings were for talking. We had 40 years to catch up on, and we did it slowly, carefully, like archaeologists examining precious, fragile artifacts. We sat in the living room, the fire crackling in the hearth on cooler nights, and we unpacked our lives. I told him more about Robert, not just the safe, surface-level facts, but the deeper truths. I told him how hard it had been to lose him, about the crushing emptiness of the house in the months afterward, about how I had to force myself out of bed every morning, about the particular, lonely ache of widowhood, the way people treat you like half a person once your husband is gone. He listened, his eyes never leaving my face, absorbing my pain as if it were his own. In turn, he told me about his business, the roller coaster ride of building Galloway Development from a small, hungry company to a respected empire. He spoke of the risks, the sleepless nights, the triumphs that felt hollow when there was no one to share them with, and he told me about the women. "There was one woman," he said one night as we sat near the fireplace, the rain drumming a soft rhythm against the windows. "Elena. She was an architect, brilliant, beautiful. Everyone said we were perfect for each other. We moved in the same circles, wanted the same things. She understood the demands of my work. I felt a pang of jealousy, sharp and surprising in its intensity. What happened? I proposed," he said quietly, staring into the flames. "It was 5 years ago. Christmas Eve. Big production private room at the best restaurant in town, overlooking the city, an expensive ring, everything she'd ever said she wanted. And she said yes." He paused, the memory playing out behind his eyes. "We planned the wedding for the following summer. But as the date got closer, I kept having this feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. It wasn't her. She was everything anyone could want in a wife. It was me." He finally looked at me, his expression raw and open. "The night before the wedding, I called it off." "Randall, no," I whispered, my hand going to my mouth. "What did you tell her?" "The truth," he said, his gaze holding mine, unwavering. "That I was still in love with a woman I'd met 40 years ago. And it wouldn't be fair to marry her while my heart belonged to someone else." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. "You canceled your wedding, for me?" "For the memory of you," he corrected gently. "For the possibility that someday, somehow, you might need me and I would be here, waiting. Unencumbered." I looked at this successful, handsome man who could have had anyone, and tried to process the sheer, staggering magnitude of what he was telling me. The constancy of it, the faith. "This is crazy," I breathed, the word inadequate for the storm of emotions inside me. He leaned forward, taking my hands in his. "It is," he agreed, a wry smile touching his lips. "It's crazier that you kept my business card in your wallet for 40 years. He was right. We were both crazy. We were both living with the ghosts of what might have been. But somehow, against all odds, our particular brand of crazy had synced up, bringing us back together in this house. By this fire, our worn hands clasped together. It was in these quiet moments that the sanctuary he offered became more than just a physical space. It became a state of being. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been my background noise for years began to quiet. The sharp edges of my grief softened. I started to relax. I stopped making my bed with such ferocious precision. I left a book open on the side table in my room. I started humming while I cooked, a soft, absent-minded sound I hadn't made in years. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after my arrival, I was in the kitchen, rolling out pie dough for an apple pie. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, and I was lost in the simple, rhythmic motion, the familiar feel of the dough under my hands. I was humming. Randall came in from his office and stopped in the doorway, watching me. I didn't hear him at first. When I looked up and saw him, I stopped, self-conscious. "Don't stop," he said softly. "I like it. It sounds like a home." And in that moment, I understood. He hadn't just been giving me a sanctuary. We had been building one together. Out of roasted chicken and shared stories, out of walks in the garden and quiet evenings by the fire. Out of a second chance that felt less like a miracle and more like a homecoming. The house was no longer just his. It was becoming ours, and I was no longer just a guest, surviving. I was beginning to live again. The sanctuary we were building was not without its shadows. The past was a silent tenant in the house, its presence felt in the quiet moments between conversations. In the way a certain song on the radio could make us both fall silent, lost in separate memories that somehow converged in this shared space. We had opened the door to our histories, and now the ghosts had followed us in. It was a Thursday evening, and a cold front had moved in, bringing a persistent, chilling rain. We were in the library, a room I'd come to love, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, worn leather armchairs, and the scent of old paper and wood polish. A fire crackled robustly in the stone hearth, pushing back against the damp gloom outside. I was curled in my usual chair, a soft afghan over my legs, mending a small tear in one of my new blouses. Randall was across from me, sipping a glass of bourbon, staring into the flames. The conversation had lulled into a comfortable silence, but I could feel a tension in him, a preoccupation that had been building all day. "You're quiet tonight," I said, my needle pausing. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, watching it catch the firelight. "I was thinking about my father," he said, his voice a low rumble. "He never believed I could do it. Build this." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the room, the house, the empire beyond. He thought I was too much of a dreamer. Said I should be happy running his small-time operation, building patios and room additions for the rest of my life. I set my mending down. This was new ground. He'd spoken of his ambition, but not the resistance he'd faced. "What did he say when you started Galloway Development?" A bitter smile touched Randall's lips. "He said I'd be bankrupt in a year. That I was throwing my life away on a fantasy." He took a slow sip of his drink. "He died 2 years after I started the company. Just when we were landing our first big contract. He never saw any of it. He never saw me succeed." The pain in his voice was old, weathered, but still present, a fossilized heartache. "I'm so sorry, Randall." He shrugged, a gesture that tried to convey nonchalance but failed. "It is what it is, but it lit a fire under me, I'll tell you that. Every skyscraper, every shopping center, every damn parking garage I built, after that was a giant, I told you so, aimed at a ghost." He looked at me, his amber eyes reflecting the fire. "I built this whole Life to prove something to a man who wasn't even here to see it. Isn't that pathetic? No, I said softly, my heart aching for the driven, lonely young man he had been. It's human. We all have ghosts we're trying to prove something to. What's yours? He asked, his gaze intent. The question hung in the air. I looked down at my hands, at the wedding band I still wore, a simple gold band that felt like a part of my finger. I hadn't taken it off since Robert died. My ghost is quieter, I began, choosing my words carefully. It's not about proving anything. It's about a choice I made. I took a deep breath. When I married Robert, I loved him. I truly did. He was my rock. But a part of me, a small, secret part, always wondered, what if I had waited? What if I had believed in your promises just a little while longer? I dared to look up at him. His expression was unreadable, his full attention fixed on me. I built a good life with Robert, I continued, my voice gaining strength. A solid, happy life. But it was a life of comfort, not passion. It was a life of security, not risk. And sometimes in the quiet of the evening, when he was watching TV and I was knitting, that ghost would whisper. The ghost of the girl who sat on the hood of a car and dreamed under the stars. The ghost of you. I had never admitted this to anyone, not even to myself in the clear light of day. The confession felt like pulling a splinter from deep under my skin, painful, but ultimately a relief. I don't regret my life with Robert, I said firmly, needing him to understand. He gave me David. He gave me a home. He was a good man. But I have always carried the regret of that other path. The path that ended the day I said I do. Randall was silent for a long time, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the steady drum of the rain. He finished his bourbon and set the glass down with a soft click. I have a regret, too, he said, his voice so quiet I had to lean forward to hear him. A bigger one. I waited. My regret, he said, meeting my eyes, is that I ever left. The simplicity of the statement was devastating. I was young and stupid and so damn proud, he continued, his words coming faster now, as if a dam had broken. I thought I had to have it all, the success, the money, the empire, before I was worthy of you. I thought you deserved a king, and I was just a kid with a tool belt and a dream, so I went to Atlanta. I threw myself into that project, and then the next one, and the one after that. I was building my kingdom for you, Grace. But I was so busy building the walls, I forgot to come back for the queen. Tears welled in my eyes. Your letters, they stopped. He nodded, a look of profound shame crossing his face. I know. It got hard. The project was failing. My investors were pulling out. I was losing everything. How could I write to you about that? How could I tell you I was failing? The proud, stupid boy I was thought it was better to just disappear. To let you think I'd forgotten you, rather than know I was a failure. I would have understood, I whispered, the lost years stretching between us, a vast landscape of what-ifs. I know that now, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But by the time I dug myself out, by the time I had my first real success, I heard you'd met someone. Robert. And that you were happy. He gave a broken little laugh. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I kept building. I built and I built, trying to fill the hole you'd left. But nothing ever fit. Not the money, not the women, not the accolades. The hole was grace-shaped, and there was only one you. We sat there, the ghosts of our younger selves, hovering in the room between us, the proud, ambitious boy and the practical, hopeful girl, both of whom had made choices based on fear and a misguided sense of what was right. All these years, I said, shaking my head in wonder. We were both living with the same ghost. The ghost of us, he finished. The rain had lessened to a soft patter. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. The tension that had been in the room, the weight of our unspoken regrets, began to dissipate, replaced by a profound, aching understanding. I'm sorry I didn't wait, I said. I'm sorry I didn't come back, he replied. It wasn't about blame anymore. It was about acknowledgement. About finally laying the ghosts to rest. We had both made our choices, we had both lived our lives. And somehow, against all odds, we had been given this impossible, precious second chance. Randall stood up and came over to my chair. He knelt down in front of me, his eyes level with mine. He didn't touch me, just looked at me, his gaze sweeping over my face as if memorizing it. "The past is what it is, Grace," he said, his voice steady and sure. "We can't change it, we can only learn from it, and what I've learned is that life is too damn short to live with regrets. I lost you once because of my pride, I'm not going to lose you again." He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw. The touch was electric, a current that ran straight to my soul. "The ghost of us doesn't have to be a regret anymore," he whispered. "It can be a foundation. The foundation for whatever time we have left." I placed my hand over his, holding it against my cheek. The simple gold band of my wedding ring pressed against his skin. It felt like a bridge between my past and my future. In that moment, surrounded by the ghosts of our pasts, I felt them not as chains, but as witnesses. They had brought us here, to this fire-lit room, to this understanding. The proud boy and the practical girl had finally grown up. They had finally found their way back to each other. And as I looked into Randall's eyes, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that our story wasn't about the years we'd lost. It was about the time we had left. And I intended to cherish every single second of it. The confession in the library, the laying bare of our deepest regrets, acted like a summer storm that clears a stifling humidity. The air in the house felt different afterward, lighter, cleaner, charged with a new and potent sense of possibility. The ghosts we had invited in no longer lingered as specters of sorrow, but had been acknowledged and, in a way, invited to stay as part of the foundation of who we were now. A new rhythm began to emerge. One not of polite coexistence, but of a life being woven together, thread by careful thread. The healing was no longer just about recovering from the fire or my son's rejection. It was about knitting together the frayed edges of two separate lives into a single, stronger tapestry. It started in the kitchen. Before, my cooking had been a gesture of gratitude, a way to contribute. Now, it became a collaboration. Randall would come home from his office, which was now often just a room down the hall, as he'd started working from home more, and instead of retreating to his study, he'd wander into the kitchen. "What's on the menu tonight, chef?" he'd ask, rolling up the sleeves of his dress shirt. At first, I'd shoo him away. "I can manage. Go relax." But he'd persist, picking up a knife to chop vegetables or uncorking a bottle of wine to let it breathe. He was a competent, if not inspired, cook, and he took direction well. We'd move around each other in the spacious kitchen, a silent, easy dance. I'd point to a bunch of parsley, and he'd know to chop it fine. He'd taste a sauce and suggest a pinch more salt. We learned each other's rhythms, the way I hummed when I was concentrating, the way he tapped his finger against the counter when he was thinking. One evening, I was attempting my mother's recipe for beef bourguignon, a dish I hadn't made in years because Robert hadn't been fond of the wine sauce. I was browning the beef, the rich, savory scent filling the air, when Randall came in. "That smells like a memory," he said, leaning against the island and watching me. "It is," I said, a lump forming in my throat. It was my mother's Sunday special. She'd let me stir the pot. I looked at the sizzling meat, the memories washing over me. "I haven't made it since she passed." He didn't say anything. He just came up behind me, his presence a solid comfort at my back, and placed his hands gently on my shoulders. He didn't offer empty words. He just stood there, sharing the space, sharing the memory. It was in these small, quiet moments that the deepest healing occurred. He wasn't trying to replace my past, he was making space for it in our present. The after-dinner walks became a sacred ritual. As the days grew longer, we'd stroll through his property, the setting sun painting the lake in shades of orange and violet. He showed me more than just the gardens now, he showed me his dreams. He led me to a secluded, level clearing overlooking the water, surrounded by tall pines. "I always thought this would be a good spot for a smaller house," he said, his voice thoughtful. "Something cozier, with a bigger porch for rocking chairs." I looked at him, surprised. "You'd leave this?" I gestured back toward the magnificent house. "This was built for a different dream," he said simply, his gaze fixed on the tranquil view of the lake. "A dream of impressing people, of proving a point. That dream doesn't matter to me anymore." He turned to look at me, the last of the sun catching in his amber eyes. "My dreams are simpler now." My heart swelled with a feeling so profound it threatened to overwhelm me. He was talking about a future with me in it. The rhythm extended to the quietest parts of the day. I had always been an Aldard, early riser, but now, I'd wait to find he was already up, the coffee made. He'd bring 2 mugs out to the porch and we'd sit as the world woke up, often not speaking at all. The silence was no longer filled with the static of our pasts, but with a comfortable, shared peace. I started reading the newspaper again, something I'd given up after Robert died, because it felt like too much effort. Randall would point out articles he thought I'd find interesting about local politics or a new park being built, gently drawing me back into the world. One Saturday, he announced, "We're going out." I froze, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. Going out meant people. It meant facing the world, a world where I was the woman whose house had burned down, who had been rejected by her son, who was now living off the charity of a wealthy old flame. The sanctuary of his home had become my entire universe, and the thought of leaving its protective bubble was terrifying. He saw the panic on my face. "Just a quick trip," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "To the garden center. The orchids need a specific fertilizer, and I want your opinion on some new annuals for the pots by the front door." It was a pretext, and we both knew it. But it was a pretext I could handle. A mission. The garden center was a sprawling, fragrant paradise. For the first 10 minutes, I stayed close to his side, hyper-aware of the other shoppers, half expecting to see someone I knew, someone who would look at us with judgment or worse, pity. But Randall was a patient guide. He didn't push. He'd stop to examine a plant, asking me what I thought of the color. He'd make a silly comment about the name of a flower, making me laugh. Slowly, my shoulders relaxed. I found myself drawn to a display of lavender, running my fingers through the silvery green foliage, releasing its calming scent. "We should get some of this," I said, surprising myself, for by the bedroom windows. His smile was worth the initial fear. "Excellent idea." We left with bags of soil, fertilizer, and an assortment of plants, including a pot of lavender that sat between us on the drive home. I had faced the world, and the world hadn't ended. It had, in fact, offered me lavender. That small victory opened a door. A few days later, I suggested we drive into the small, nearby town for lunch at a cafe he liked. I wore one of my simple new outfits, but I let him hold my hand as we walked from the car, his grip strong and reassuring. We ate sandwiches at a small table on the sidewalk, and nobody looked at us twice. We were just another couple, enjoying the sunshine. The rhythm of healing was not a straight line. There were still moments when the past would reach out with a cold hand. I'd be folding laundry, and a scent would remind me of David as a baby, and a wave of grief so sharp it was physical would wash over me. Or I'd wake from a nightmare of roaring flames, my heart pounding, the smell of smoke still in my nostrils. The first time it happened, I was embarrassed. I found Randall in his office, working late. He took one look at my tear-streaked face and stood up, wordlessly opening his arms. I walked into them, and he held me until the shaking stopped. "It's okay," he murmured into my hair. "I've got you. You're safe." He didn't try to logic away the pain. He just provided a harbor for it. And in doing so, he gave the pain less power. The storms still came, but I was no longer a small boat alone in them. I was anchored. One afternoon, I was in the library, looking for a book. My eyes fell on a beautiful, leather-bound photo album on a bottom shelf. I pulled it out. It was filled with pictures of Randall's projects, aerial shots of half-built shopping centers, blueprints, groundbreaking ceremonies with mayors and golden shovels. It was the story of his empire. But as I flipped through the pages, I noticed something. In nearly every photo of a completed project, he was standing alone. Surrounded by people, but fundamentally alone. I closed the album, my heart aching for the man in those pictures. He had built all of this, but he had built it for an audience of one, a ghost. And now he was offering to tear it all down, to build something smaller, something cozier, for an audience of two. That evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the fireflies dance over the lawn, I reached over and took his hand. "Thank you," I said softly. He looked at me, his expression questioning. "For what?" "For the rhythm," I said, because it was the only word that fit. "For this." I gestured at the fireflies, the lake, the quiet house behind us, the feel of his hand in mine. "For teaching me how to live again." He brought my hand to his lips and kissed my knuckles, a simple, tender gesture that sent a wave of warmth through my entire body. "No, Grace," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for finally coming home." And in that moment, surrounded by the gentle rhythm of a healing life, I knew that I had. The fire had destroyed my old home, but it had led me to a new one. Not just a house of stone and glass, but a home built on a foundation of shared regrets, understood pasts, and a second chance at a love that had waited 40 years to bloom. The rhythm of our new life was a delicate ecosystem, a balanced world of quiet mornings, shared meals, and healing silences. For the first time in years, perhaps in my entire life, I felt a sense of profound peace. The sharp edges of grief had been sanded smooth by Randall's constant, gentle presence. I was, against all odds, happy. Which is why the sound of my phone ringing that Tuesday afternoon felt like a shattering of glass. I was in the kitchen, actually humming, as I chopped vegetables for a salad. The sun was streaming in, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Randall's laptop was open on the breakfast nook table, but he was outside, talking on his cell phone about a zoning permit. The ringtone was the generic, insistent trill I'd never bothered to change. It was David's ringtone. The humming died in my throat. My hand stilled, the chef's knife hovering over a red bell pepper. The sound was an intrusion, a discordant note from a past life I was trying to forget. I let it go to voicemail. My heart was a frantic bird against my ribs. The peace of the kitchen felt fragile, threatened. A minute later, it rang again. The same trill, more insistent this time. I wiped my hands on a towel, my palms suddenly damp. I picked up the phone from the counter. David's name glowed on the screen, a little rectangle of accusation. I took a deep breath and swiped to answer. "Hello, dear," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral, pleasant. The voice of the mother he expected. "Mom." His tone was odd. Carefully controlled, but with an undercurrent of something I couldn't place. Irritation? Concern? "I've been trying to call you. Your phone keeps going straight to voicemail." That was true. In the peace of Randall's home, I'd let the battery die more than once, and I'd been screening calls, not ready to face the outside world, and especially not ready to face him. "I've been busy," I said, the lie coming easily. I looked around the beautiful, sunlit kitchen. Busy healing. Busy living. Busy doing what? The question was sharp. "I heard you checked out of the hotel weeks ago. Where are you living?" I could hear the unspoken judgment, the assumption that I must be in some state-funded shelter or a roach-infested studio. I looked at the fresh flowers Randall had brought home that morning, at the expensive wine glasses drying on the counter. "I'm staying with a friend," I said, my voice cooler than I intended. "What friend?" The skepticism was palpable. "Mom, you don't have friends with money." The bluntness of it, the casual dismissal of my entire social existence, was like a slap. He was right, of course. After Robert died, my world had shrunk. But his assumption, delivered with such matter-of-fact certainty, ignited a small, hot coal of anger in my chest. "Would you be surprised?" I said, the chill in my voice unmistakable now. There was a pause. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, processing this new information. A mother who wasn't where he expected her to be. A mother who was being difficult. "Mom, I think we need to talk." His tone shifted, becoming conciliatory, the voice he probably used with difficult clients. "Victoria and I have been discussing the situation, and we think maybe we were too hasty." My grip tightened on the phone. the situation, as if my homelessness was a minor logistical problem. "Maybe you could stay in our guest room for a while," he continued, his voice dripping with a magnanimity that made my skin crawl. "Just until you get back on your feet." The offer that would have been my salvation a month ago now felt like an insult. It was a peace offering born not of genuine remorse, but of curiosity and a desire to reassert control. He'd heard through the neighborhood gossip vine, no doubt from Mrs. Jenkins or another busybody, that his mother was no longer in a state of visible desperation. Someone had seen her with a well-dressed man. Someone had seen her getting into a very nice car. David was curious, and his curiosity had made him suddenly, conveniently generous. "What made you change your mind?" I asked, my voice flat. Another pause. He wasn't prepared for this. He'd expected tearful gratitude, not a cross-examination. "We realized that maybe we were too focused on our own needs," he said, the words sounding rehearsed. "Family needs to stick together." Family. The word coming from his mouth was hollow. What he meant was, "I've heard a rumor you might not be a complete charity case anymore, and I want to know what's going on." "That's very kind of you," I said, the words polite and utterly empty. "But I'm perfectly happy where I am. Mom, you can't just move in with a stranger." His control was slipping, a note of genuine frustration seeping in. "It's not safe. What do you even know about this person?" The coal of anger in my chest flared. He wasn't concerned about my safety. He was concerned about his own narrative, about the potential embarrassment of a mother being taken in by some random man. He was trying to drag me back into the box labeled helpless mother where I belonged. "I know he's never made me feel like a burden," I said, my voice quiet but clear, carrying across the miles with a newfound strength. "I know he values my company and appreciates my cooking, and he tells me I'm beautiful every single day." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I had thrown his own rejection back in his face, and I had countered it with a reality he couldn't comprehend. "The wedding wasn't," he began, flustered, but I cut him off. I was done. "The wedding wasn't what, David? Wasn't your idea? Wasn't what a good son would do?" I took a steadying breath. "It doesn't matter. The offer is too late. I have built a life here. A good one. And I am not interested in being a temporary guest in your sanctuary. Waiting for you and Victoria to decide my independence is too much of an inconvenience." "Mom, that's not fair." "Fair?" The word was a spark on tinder. "Was it fair to turn your mother away with a suitcase and a few $100s after she lost everything? Was it fair to prioritize your privacy over my basic need for shelter?" "Don't talk to me about fair, David. You lost that right the moment you closed that red door." I heard his sharp intake of breath. I had never spoken to him like this. I had always been the placating mother, the one who smoothed things over, who accepted the crumbs of his affection. "I'm your son," he said, his voice tight with a wounded pride that sounded so much like his father's. "I know," I said, and a profound sadness washed over me, cooling the anger. "And I will always love you because of that. But love doesn't mean I have to accept being treated as an afterthought, or a problem to be managed." I could see Randall through the window. He had finished his call and was standing on the patio, looking out at the lake, giving me privacy but offering his silent support. His presence, his solid, unwavering belief in me, was the foundation that allowed me to stand my ground. "I have to go now, David," I said, my voice firm, final. "I have a life to live. I hope you and Victoria are very happy in yours." "Mom, wait." I didn't. I ended the call. I placed the phone back on the counter, my hand trembling only slightly. The kitchen was silent again, but the peace felt different now. It wasn't a fragile peace anymore. It was a peace I had fought for, a peace I had chosen. I stood there for a long moment, letting the emotions settle. The anger subsided, leaving behind a clean, clear sorrow for the relationship that might never be healed. But alongside the sorrow was something else, something stronger, pride. I had stood up for myself. I had chosen my own sanctuary, my own happiness, over the conditional, belated offer from my son. I had finally, after 65 years, drawn a boundary of my own. The patio door slid open, and Randall stepped in. He didn't ask what happened. He just looked at me, his eyes full of a deep, understanding warmth. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. I looked around the sunlit kitchen, at the man who saw me not as a burden, but as a gift. I took a deep, cleansing breath, the scent of chopped vegetables and fresh flowers filling my lungs. "Yes," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "Everything is perfectly okay." I picked up the knife and finished chopping the bell pepper. The rhythm was restored, but it was stronger now, tempered. I had faced a ghost from my past, and I had not been found wanting. I had chosen my future. And as I began to hum again, softly, I knew that the reckoning was over. I had won. The confrontation with David had been a crucible. In its fiery aftermath, a final, invisible chain that had tethered me to my old life of quiet acceptance was severed. The peace I felt in Randall's home was no longer just a temporary refuge. It was my reality. I was no longer Grace, the victim of tragedy, but Grace, the architect of her own second chance. A new lightness settled in my step. I stopped thinking of myself as a guest. I started rearranging the living room furniture one afternoon, just slightly, to better catch the afternoon light for reading. Randall came home, looked at the shifted sofa, and smiled. "Better," was all he said. It was our home now. We began to venture out more, little expeditions into the world as a couple. We went to the farmer's market on Saturdays, our fingers laced together as we sampled local honey and chose ripe peaches. We saw a play at the community theater, his arm resting comfortably around my shoulders in the dark. We were, to any outside observer, exactly what we were, a man and a woman, comfortable and content in each other's company, deeply in love. But beneath the serene surface of our days, a new current of anticipation began to flow. It was in the way Randall would sometimes look at me across the dinner table, his gaze so full of tender intensity it made my breath catch. It was in the way he'd start a sentence when we, instead of, "if you." The future was no longer a vague concept. It was a shared blueprint we were drawing together. One evening, about a week after the phone call with David, we were back in the library. I was reading a novel, and he was ostensibly reviewing a contract, but I could feel his eyes on me. I looked up. "What is it?" I asked, a smile touching my lips. He closed his folio and set it aside. "Do you remember the Overlook?" he asked, his voice soft. How could I forget? The place where he'd spun his dreams, where I'd written "Never Forget" on the back of his card. The place that existed in my memory as a shrine to youthful passion and lost potential. "Of course I do," I said. "I was thinking," he began, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "The city has grown so much, it's probably not the same. There's likely a strip mall there now, or a subdivision." "Probably," I agreed, a faint pang of loss for that wild, quiet spot touching my heart. "But I was thinking," he continued, a mischievous glint in his amber eyes, "what if we found a new one? Our own Overlook, for the people we are now." The idea was simple, beautiful. A reclaiming. "I'd like that," I said. "Tomorrow then," he declared. "We'll pack a picnic, make a day of it." The next day dawned clear and bright. Randall was unusually secretive, bustling about the kitchen, packing the picnic basket himself, and shooing me away when I tried to help. He packed a crisp white tablecloth, real silverware, and a bottle of champagne, which struck me as decidedly fancy for a simple picnic. We drove for almost an hour, leaving the city behind, and winding our way up into the rolling, forested hills west of Charlotte. He seemed to know exactly where he was going, turning down a narrow, unpaved road I never would have noticed. "Is this it?" I asked as the car bumped along the track. "Almost," he said, a smile playing on his lips. The road ended in a small, circular clearing, surrounded by tall, whispering pines. But it was what was beyond the clearing that stole the breath from my lungs. It wasn't the same Overlook from our youth. This was better. It was higher, more private. The view was breathtaking, a sweeping panorama of the Piedmont, with Charlotte's skyline a tiny, glittering cluster in the distance, nestled in a patchwork of green and gold. The world lay at our feet, vast and full of promise. "Randall, it's beautiful," I whispered. "I bought this land a few years back," he said, coming to stand beside me. "Never knew what to do with it. It was just a good view, an investment." He turned to look at me. "Now I know what it's for." He spread the tablecloth on a flat, grassy spot at the very edge of the overlook. He unpacked the picnic with a quiet ceremony: crusty bread, a wedge of ripe brie, strawberries, and the bottle of champagne. We ate and talked, the conversation easy and flowing, but I could feel the anticipation building in the air, as tangible as the breeze that ruffled my hair. When we had finished, he poured the last of the champagne into our two flutes. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of rose and orange. "Grace," he said, his voice suddenly serious. He set his glass down and took both of my hands in his. His palms were warm, his grip firm. "These last few months with you, they haven't felt like a second chance. They felt like the first real chance I've ever had." My heart began to beat a wild, hopeful rhythm against my ribs. "I loved you at 25, he continued, his amber eyes holding mine, full of a love so deep and certain it felt like coming home. "But I love the woman you are now so much more. I love your strength. I love the way you hum when you cook. I love the light you've brought into my house, into my life. I love the way you've faced your ghosts and helped me face mine." He released one of my hands and reached into the pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a small, velvet box. My breath hitched. "I spent 40 years building a life I thought I was supposed to want," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But it was all just a belief. Waiting room. I was waiting for you." He opened the box. Nestled inside wasn't a large, flashy diamond. It was an elegant, emerald-cut sapphire, the color of a twilight sky, flanked by two smaller, brilliant diamonds. It was unique, it was timeless, it was utterly, perfectly me. "Grace," he whispered, his gaze unwavering. "Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Will you let me spend whatever time we have left loving you, cherishing you, building a new life with you from the ashes of the old ones?" Tears streamed down my face, but they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. This wasn't a proposal from a boy full of dreams. This was a proposal from a man who knew the value of time, of history, of second chances. He wasn't offering me a fantasy, he was offering me a future. A real, solid, beautiful future. I looked from the stunning, sincere ring to his face, to the eyes that had haunted my dreams and were now my waking reality. There were no ghosts here, no regrets. Only this man, this moment, this perfect, overwhelming love. "Yes," I said, my voice strong and clear, carrying on the mountain breeze. "Oh, Randall, yes. 1,000 times, yes." A smile broke over his face, a smile of such profound relief and happiness that it outshone the setting. Sunday he slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit as if it had been made for me, which, I realized, it had. He had chosen this for me, knowing me, seeing me. He stood, pulling me to my feet and into his arms. He kissed me then, not with the frantic passion of our youth, but with a deep, reverent love that spoke of promises kept and a future vowed. It was a kiss that held 40 years of longing and a lifetime of hope. When we finally pulled apart, breathless and laughing, the sun was dipping below the horizon, setting the world on fire. I looked down at the ring on my finger, the sapphire glowing in the twilight. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol, a promise, a new beginning carved out of the ruins of our pasts. "I have something for you, too," I said, a little shyly. I reached into my own pocket and pulled out the old, frayed business card. I held it out to him. He took it, his fingers brushing against mine. He looked at it, at his own faded name, at my youthful handwriting on the back. "Never forget, G." "I kept my promise, too," I said softly. Tears shone in his eyes now. He looked from the card, a relic of our past, to the ring on my finger, the emblem of our future. "We found our way back," he whispered, his voice full of awe. We did, I said, leaning my head against his shoulder as we watched the stars begin to pepper the darkening sky. We're finally home. And as we stood there, on our new overlook, with the whole world spread out before us, I knew it was true. The fire had taken everything, but it had also cleared the ground. And on that fertile ground, watered with tears of grief and regret, a love we thought was lost had not only taken root again, but had burst into a bloom more beautiful and resilient than we could have ever imagined. The week following the proposal was bathed in a golden, dreamlike quality. The sapphire on my finger was a constant, wondrous presence, catching the light as I cooked, as I gardened, as I held Randall's hand. We were like teenagers, stealing kisses in the hallway, our smiles coming easier and more frequently. The house was no longer just a sanctuary. It was the setting for our new, shared life, humming with a quiet, profound joy. But a wedding, even a small one, requires planning. And planning meant making decisions that reached beyond our private bubble. The first and most difficult decision was the guest list, or, more accurately, the one guest who presented a problem. We were sitting at the kitchen island, a notepad between us. Maria, of course, I said, writing her name down. Randall's housekeeper had become a warm, smiling presence in my life. Marcus, Randall added, referring to his business partner and closest friend. And his wife, Lena. The pastor, your friend from college. That's it, then, Randall said, capping his pen. Simple. Just the people who matter. The silence that followed was heavy with the one name we hadn't written. David. I stared at the short list, my happiness tinged with a familiar dull ache. He was my son, my only child. The little boy whose hand I had held on his first day of school, whose graduation had filled me with immeasurable pride. To get married without him, there felt like a betrayal of that history, a final, brutal severing of a tie that, despite everything, still felt intrinsic to who I was. David, I said quietly, the name a sigh. Randall covered my hand with his. He's your son, Grace. You'll regret it if you don't give him a chance to make it right. And Victoria? I asked, a hard edge, returning to my voice at the thought of her. That's your call, he said, his tone neutral, but his eyes understanding. It's your wedding. I thought of her perfectly curated smile, her cold assessment of me in her entryway, her hand on David's arm, steering him away from me. I thought of the word boundaries and the cheap hotel room. I would not have her there. I would not have her judgmental gaze and her silent calculations poisoning the most sacred day of my life. Victoria is not invited, I said, my voice firm. He can come. Alone. Or not at all. So, 2 weeks before the ceremony, I made the call. I sat in the library, the phone feeling heavy in my hand, my heart pounding with a nervous dread I hadn't felt since the day I'd called Randall from the hotel. He answered on the second ring. David speaking. David, it's Mom. A pause. Mom, hi. The tension was immediate, a live wire stretching between us. I'm calling because Randall and I are getting married. The silence that followed was so profound I could hear the hum of the line. Married? He finally repeated, the word dripping with disbelief. You've known him for, what, 3 months? The ceremony is on November 15th, at 2 o'clock, here at the house, I continued, ignoring his tone. You are welcome to come, but David, Victoria is not invited. This time, the silence was explosive. I could feel his outrage through the phone. You're not inviting my fiancée to your wedding. That's correct, I said, my voice steady, though my hands were trembling. This day is for me, for us. And I will not have anyone there who has shown me anything less than kindness and respect. Mom, this is ridiculous. She's my wife-to-be. She's family. Is she? I asked softly. Family doesn't turn family away when they have nowhere else to go. He had no answer for that, only a frustrated, angry silence. The choice is yours, David. I would like you to be there, but if you come alone. I hung up before he could respond, my entire body shaking. It was the hardest phone call I had ever made. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, the November air sharp and clean. The ceremony was to be in the backyard, under a simple arch that Randall and Marcus had adorned with greenery and white roses. I felt a surreal calmness as I got ready in my room. I wore a simple, elegant dress of pale blue cashmere that fell to my knees, with a matching jacket. Randall had been right. It did match my eyes. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. I saw a 65-year-old woman with silver in her hair and lines on her face. But I also saw a woman with a light in her eyes that hadn't been there for years. A woman who was loved, deeply and completely. A woman who was choosing her own happiness. There was a soft knock on the door. Maria peeked in, her eyes misty. "He's here," she said softly. My heart stuttered. "David?" She nodded. I took a deep breath and walked out to the living room. David stood by the large window, his back to me, looking out at the backyard where the chairs were set up. He was alone. He turned as I entered. He looked uncomfortable in a suit that was too formal for the simple backyard ceremony, his hands shoved in his pockets. His eyes did a quick, appraising sweep of the room, taking in the understated wealth, the tasteful art, the feeling of a real, lived-in home. Then his gaze landed on me. I saw a flicker of something surprise, maybe before his expression settled into its usual, careful neutrality. "Mom," he said, "you look nice." It was the most he could muster. Not beautiful, not happy, just nice. "Thank you for coming, David," I said, my voice even. He nodded, his eyes dropping to the sapphire ring on my finger. I saw the calculation in his gaze, the mental arithmetic he was doing, the value of the ring, the house, the car in the driveway. This was why he had come. Not to support me, but to see for himself. To take inventory. "Shall we?" Randall said, appearing in the doorway that led to the patio. He looked distinguished and heartbreakingly handsome in his gray suit. His eyes found mine, and the love in them was so potent it felt like a physical force, pushing back the chill David had brought into the room. David shook Randall's hand with a stiff, polite formality. "Congratulations," he said, the words sounding like a concession. The ceremony was brief and deeply moving. The pastor, an old friend of Randall's with a kind face, spoke not of youthful passion but of second chances, of love that endures time and circumstance, of the profound courage it takes to begin again. As we exchanged the simple vows we had written for each other, I kept my eyes locked on Randall's. I didn't look at David. This moment was ours. When the pastor declared us husband and wife, Randall kissed me, a sweet, tender kiss that held the weight of all our lost years and the promise of all the years to come. Maria sniffled. Marcus clapped Randall on the back. And from the corner of my eye, I saw David manage a strange, tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. He stayed for a piece of the small wedding cake Maria had made and a glass of champagne. He made polite, stilted small talk with Marcus, asking about the real estate market. He did not speak to me again about the wedding, about my life, about anything of substance. He was a spectator, an auditor of my new happiness. After about an hour, he made his excuses. "I should be going. Victoria is expecting me." He stood in the entryway, the same spot where I had stood as a desperate, broken woman months before. He looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw the little boy he used to be, and my heart ached. "I'm glad you're settled, Mom," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. "I am David," I said. "I truly am." He nodded, gave Randall another curt nod, and then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Randall came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me back against his chest. "You okay?" he murmured into my hair. I looked around the quiet, beautiful house, at the faces of the few people who truly loved and supported us. I felt the solid weight of my husband's arms around me, the cool touch of my wedding band against my skin. The uninvited guest had come and gone. He had seen my happiness, and he had not been able to touch it. He had not been able to diminish it. He was a ghost from a past life, and this was my present. This was my future. I turned in Randall's arms and looked up at him, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. "I've never been better," I said, and I kissed my husband, sealing the vow, closing the door on the past, and stepping fully, completely, into the life I was always meant to have. This morning, I woke up in Randall's arms, no, in my husband's arms. The distinction still sends a quiet thrill through me, a ripple of wonder that hasn't faded in the months since we stood under that arch of roses. The wedding wasn't the end of a story, but the gentle, official beginning of a new chapter, written in the quiet language of shared life. Our marriage settled around us, not with the dramatic fanfare of a grand romance, but with the deep, comforting warmth of a well-tended fire. The house, once a beautiful but echoing monument to a solitary dream, was now truly a home. My books sat on his shelves, my lavender plant thrived on the bedroom windowsill. A second rocking chair, a birthday gift from him, now sat beside his on the porch, a silent promise of countless sunrises to be shared. We didn't take a lavish honeymoon, we didn't need to. Our life together felt like one continuous discovery. We did, however, spend a long weekend at a quiet inn on the coast. We walked for hours on the empty beach, the cold Atlantic wind whipping our hair, his hand never leaving mine. We talked about everything and nothing, the way the light caught the waves, the taste of the fresh lobster, the simple, profound joy of having nowhere to be and no one to be but us. In the evenings, curled up by a fireplace in our room, we made plans, not the grandiose, world-conquering plans of our youth, but gentle, domestic blueprints. We decided to plant a vegetable garden in the spring. We talked about getting a dog. The rhythm we had established only deepened. Mornings were still for coffee on the porch, but now our conversation was peppered with we and ours. He'd read me an article about a local concert series and we'd decide to get tickets. I'd point out a bird I didn't recognize, and he'd fetch his field guide, and we'd look it up together, our heads bent close. One afternoon, I was in the library, and my eyes fell upon the beautiful leather-bound album of his projects. I pulled it out again. This time, as I flipped through the pages of half-built skyscrapers and ribbon-cutting ceremonies, I didn't see a lonely man. I saw the foundation. I saw the ambition and drive that had shaped him, the path that had, against all odds, led him back to me. The man in those pictures wasn't a ghost anymore. He was my husband, who now built tomato cages in the backyard, and whose greatest triumph of the week was perfecting a new recipe for marinara sauce with me. I heard his footsteps and looked up. He stood in the doorway, watching me. Remembering the old me? He asked, a soft smile on his face. I'm appreciating him. I corrected, closing the album. He worked very hard to bring you here. He came and sat beside me, taking my hand. His wedding band, a simple platinum band, felt solid and right against my skin. He had good motivation. The love I felt for him in that moment was so vast it was almost frightening. It wasn't the dizzying, passionate whirlwind of my youth. This was something else. Something deeper, rooted in shared history, understood loss, and a fierce, protective gratitude for this second chance. It was a love that had been tempered by fire, both literal and figurative, and had emerged stronger, more resilient. There were still moments, of course. A song on the radio would remind me of Robert, and a quiet sadness would settle over me. Or I'd see a mother and son laughing together in the grocery store, and the old wound of David's rejection would throb faintly. But the pain was no longer a tidal wave that threatened to drown me. It was a soft rain, and Randall was always there with an umbrella, or simply the willingness to stand in the rain with me. One evening, we were back in the library, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. I was knitting a scarf, a new hobby I'd picked up, and he was reading. "Did I ever tell you," he began, his voice thoughtful, "about the time I almost named the company something else?" I looked up, my needles stilling. "No." "What was it?" "Thorne and Galloway," he said, his amber eyes meeting mine over the top of his book. My breath caught. "You didn't." "I did. I had the paperwork drawn up. It felt right, like you were a part of it, even if you didn't know." He gave a self-deprecating shrug. "My lawyer talked me out of it. Said it was bad luck to name a company after a woman who wasn't my wife." He was right, of course, but the sentiment was there, Grace. It was always there. Tears pricked my eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming love for this man and the constancy of his heart. He had carried me with him all those years, not as a regret, but as a partner in spirit. That's what our forever love was. It was in these stories, these confessions that spanned decades. It was in the way he still told me I was beautiful every single day, not because he felt he had to, but because he truly saw it. It was in the way I knew exactly how he took his coffee, and he knew that I needed 5 more minutes of quiet in the morning before I could form a coherent sentence. It was in the quiet solidarity we built, a fortress against the world. When a letter came from David, a stiff, formal note about his and Victoria's upcoming wedding, an invitation that felt more like a summons, we read it together at the kitchen island. There was no anger, no drama. Just a shared, quiet understanding. "What do you want to do?" Randall asked, his hand covering mine. I looked at the expensive cardstock, at the perfect script that held no warmth. I thought of the red door, the suitcase, the hotel room. Then I looked at my husband, at our home, at the life we were building from ashes and hope. "I don't want to go," I said simply. "Then we won't," he said, and that was that. He tore the invitation in half and dropped it into the recycling bin. It was a small act, but it was a declaration. Our peace, our sanctuary, was ours to protect. Our love wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. It was messy and complicated and built on a foundation of 40 years of separate lives. But it was also steadfast, gentle, and fiercely protective. It was the kind of love that knew how precious it was, because it knew what it was like to be lost. That night, as we got ready for bed, I stood at the bathroom sink, brushing my teeth. Randall came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. We looked at our reflection in the mirror, a silver-haired man and a gray-haired woman, their faces lined with laughter and loss, standing together in a shared bathroom. "You know," he said, his voice muffled against my neck, "I think I love you more now than I did at 25. I spat out the toothpaste and met his gaze in the mirror. "I know I do," I said. "Back then, I loved the man I thought you could be. Now I love the man you are. And that's a much greater thing." He turned me around and kissed me, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of mint and forever. This was our love story. Not one that ended with a wedding, but one that truly began with it. A story of 2 souls who had wandered for decades, collecting scars and wisdom, only to find that their paths had been circling the same destination all along. Home. In each other. And as I fell asleep in his arms, I knew with a certainty that settled in my bones that this love, this hard-won, deeply cherished love, was the kind that truly lasts forever. I am sitting at Randall's desk, our desk in the home office. Morning light, soft and golden, streams through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, suspended fairies. My hands, now graced with both the worn gold band from Robert and the elegant sapphire from Randall, rest on the polished wood. Before me, encased in a simple silver frame, is the reason I'm here. The business card, Randall Galloway. The paper is so fragile, it seems to breathe with the memory of decades. On the back, my youthful script. A vow to a ghost, never forget. G. I have not forgotten. But the meaning of those words has transformed entirely. They are no longer a cry of longing for a lost love, but a quiet testament to a promise kept, a circuit completed after 40 years. A year has passed since the fire. A year since my life was reduced to embers and ash. I can think of it now without the sharp, suffocating panic that used to accompany the memory. The pain has become a quiet scar, a part of my history, but no longer the definition of my present. They say a phoenix rises from its own ashes. I used to think that was a myth, a pretty story for people who hadn't truly known loss. I know better now. I am living proof. The fire did not destroy me. It cleared the ground. It burned away the deadwood of a life that had already run its course, the loneliness after Robert, the strained politeness with David, the quiet desperation of a future that promised only more of the same. It was a violent, terrifying mercy. My gaze shifts from the card to the view outside the window. Randall is in the garden, on his knees in the dirt, carefully transplanting the tomato seedlings we started together in the greenhouse. He wears a faded baseball cap and old jeans, and there is a smudge of soil on his cheek. He looks more like the boy I fell in love with than the titan of industry I was so afraid of that day in the hotel parking lot. This is the man I married, the man who builds empires and tomato cages with equal passion. We built our new life just as he built his company, with patience, intention, and a deep, abiding love for the foundation. The foundation, in this case, was us. Our shared past, our separate sorrows, our hard-won wisdom. We didn't try to recreate our youth. That would have been a disservice to the people we had become. Instead, we took the raw materials of our experiences, the grief, the regret, the resilience, and we built something entirely new, something sturdier, something real. The house is no longer his. It is ours. The guest suite where I once tiptoed like a fugitive is now a cozy sitting room for reading. My knitting basket sits permanently beside my chair. The kitchen, once a sterile showpiece, is the heart of our home, perpetually smelling of garlic, rosemary, and the rich, dark roast of our morning coffee. We fill the space with laughter, with quiet conversation, with the simple, profound noise of a life being lived fully. David and Victoria were married in a large, lavish ceremony. I saw the pictures online, through the filtered lens of a mutual acquaintance's social media. They looked perfect, like figures in a magazine spread. I felt a distant, maternal hope that he would find happiness in his chosen life, but I felt no pull to be a part of it. The cord had been cleanly, finely cut. My family is here. It is Randall, and Maria, and Marcus and Lena, the small, chosen circle of people who see me and love me for who I am, not for who they think I should be. I look back at the framed card. Randall found me framing it one day. He didn't say anything, just watched me with those quiet, knowing eyes. When I was finished, he took it from my hands and placed it right here, in the center of his desk. A reminder, he'd said, his voice gruff with emotion, that some promises are worth keeping, even when it takes a lifetime to deliver on them. He was right. He kept his promise to come back for me, not as a young man with dreams, but as the fully realized man he was always meant to be. And I kept my promise to never forget, though the girl who wrote those words could never have imagined the woman she would become, or the extraordinary love that was waiting for her at the end of the long, winding road. A movement outside catches my eye. Randall has stood up, stretching his back. He sees me watching him through the window, and his face breaks into that smile, the one that still makes my heart feel both young and eternally old, all at once. He points toward the lake, then to his watch, and makes the universal sign for a coffee cup, our signal for a mid-morning break on the dock. I push back from the desk, my body moving with an ease I hadn't felt in years before I came here. The ghosts are quiet today. Robert's memory is a gentle presence, a fond gratitude for the good life we shared. The ache for David is a faded photograph in a distant album. The terror of the fire is a story I can now tell, a chapter in a much longer book. As I walk through our home toward the kitchen to fix our coffee, I run my hand along the wall, feeling the solidity of the stone. This house will not burn. This love will not fail. We have built it to last. I carry 2 mugs out to the dock, the steam rising in the cool morning air. Randall is already there, sitting on the edge, his feet dangling over the water. I sit beside him, our shoulders touching. We don't speak. We just watch the sunlight dance on the surface of the lake, listening to the call of the loons and the gentle lap of the water against the shore. This is the peace that comes after the storm. This is the life that grows from the ashes. It is not the life I planned, not the life I ever dreamed of. It is better. It is truer. Sometimes, you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you truly needed. Sometimes, the catastrophe that seems like an ending is just a brutal, necessary beginning. And sometimes, if you are very, very lucky, and perhaps a little bit brave, a first love gets a second chance to become a forever love. I take a sip of my coffee, the bitter warmth a comfort. Randall's hand finds mine, his fingers lacing through mine, our wedding bands clicking softly together. The phoenix doesn't just rise, it soars. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.